Hi everyone, I'm Darren, and this will be the last in a series of videos on the evolution that led to my current mosaic style watercolor maps. In my last video, I shared a few works that were inspired during a month-long artist residency in 2017 at Mountain Sea's Wilderness Retreat on Flinders Island off the northern coast of Tasmania. It's an experience that I can only describe as idyllic, and I think that you'll see why. That month resulted in another work, this little unassuming one next to me here, that I can think of as the archetype of these mosaic maps. Essentially, it merged my phase of representing islands from above in watercolor with the earlier phase of montaging ground level views in oils and photomontage. In this post, I'll focus on this work and introduce the spectacular place that inspired it. So, as the name Mountain Seas suggests, the site of the residency is backed by mountains, and it's also only about a half hour's walk from the coastline. The mountains make up the bulk of Strzelecki National Park in the island's southwest corner. And this particular section of coast makes up another, much smaller, disconnected sector of the park. Access to the park in general is limited to the three routes shown here dashed in white, one up to the peak and two along the coast. Most of the island has been cleared for pasture land, and the most intact and diverse natural areas that remain are in this national park, including the island's tallest peaks. So, in that sense, the park's like an island within an island. Because of the park's elevational range and varied topography, it has a striking mix of really evocative landscapes from beaches, coastal scrub and dry forests to ferny rainforest gullies, cloud forests, and rocky summits. You could say this archipelago of contrasting environments adds yet another level to that hierarchy of islands. The ruggedness of the park has kept it relatively pristine so far, but it's special in another way too. Some of its habitats are relics from a period of a wetter overall climate, and they would be restricted to these mountains even if the entire island had been left untouched by modern humans. But this refuge condition is still under threat from multiple directions, including catastrophic fire, which has ravaged other parts of the island already, invasive pests, and a warming and drying climate. This is one of the works I introduced in my last video. It's meant to capture the character of the park landscape from the air at sunset. The composition takes the portion of the park, roughly the western half, that I could grasp or visualize at least from a distance along those three hikes. And it rotates at roughly 90 degrees and it extends the coastline around the north and east sides. The idea behind turning this zone into an actual island was to accentuate that sense of grasping. But that feeling is still pretty superficial in the work itself. It doesn't really paint a picture of what it's actually like to be there. The earlier oil paintings and photomontages, since they're made up of purely ground level views, are the opposite. They're pure immersion. Not completely, since the point of the montaging was to float you above the geography at the same time, basically detaching you from any one particular scene. But again, the reason that I moved to the aerial views was to emphasize that detachment. And now I realized that I wanted more of a balance between detachment and immersion, a more multidimensional and meaningful kind of grasping. So this final project of the residency was another islandized version of the national park, that same western portion of it. But I inserted views based on my impressions and photography along the hikes. So basically, I merged the two styles together within the watercolor medium, and that brought the evolution full circle. This is also the point when I started to think of all these island explorations explicitly as maps. This cartographic framing had started with the pure aerial view watercolors. Incorporating ground level perspectives like this made that framing a little less straightforward, but it preserved the spatial quality while deepening it at the same time. There is one aspect of this map, though, that I decided not to take any further. You can't really see it that easily here, but since I was using paper rather than canvas now, I figured I could be truer to the montaging process by literally cutting and pasting the different pieces. I also thought it would be harder with watercolors than with oils to maintain straight, crisp edges on a single piece of paper. That actually meant layering up the paper into variable thicknesses. If it was all flush, the process would turn out to be basically invisible if I did a neat enough job of it. So you can see here that some of the components have blank areas that are meant to extend beneath other components. But it ended up looking gimmicky. Plus, I figured out later that I can get those straight, clean lines just as easily and with a lot less hassle using artist tape on a single sheet, which is what I've been doing since. This was actually my smallest watercolor to date at that point, despite the multiple pieces. The scale made conceptual sense as it did with the earlier watercolors. On top of heightening that feeling of grasping or knowability, it emphasizes the sense of preciousness and fragility of the park as an ecological refuge, and that explains the title, which is Sanctuary. And since I needed to take all of this home, it made practical sense too. But I also thought of this as mainly an experiment, maybe a mock up of a larger version, just a scaled up copy that I'd make later on. That copy never ended up happening. 4 years later, I did make another watercolor based on the same place, but it looks very different. By then, the works had generally become not only larger, but more intricate and mosaic like, and more true to the actual geography. So while I do think of Sanctuary, this first version, as the pivot point to my current style and medium, it doesn't really represent the end of the evolution. The map stayed relatively simple and brought in a lot of imagination for some time longer. In my next video, though, I'm going to jump ahead a few years for a deeper dive into Sanctuary Roman numeral 2, since we're already on this location. And I'll be including a lot more cool imagery from the national park. Stay tuned.